So, do you spend any significant amount of time in audio conferences or conference calls or whatever you particularly call them? Most of the people that I know who work in big organisations from time to time find themselves in an audio meeting, especially if you work as part of a team that's not all located in the same place. So if you've got colleagues in a different town or even just the other side of town, or especially if you've got colleagues in another country, then communicating by audio is usually the favoured method of having meetings. But it's interesting, isn't it? I say it's the favoured method, but most people I know actually dislike doing an audio conference. And most people will say, if I open up my diary and I look and I see that I've got an hour on audio with somebody, and my heart sinks a bit. So I thought today what we'd have a look at is the reasons why people don't like audio conferencing, and then one or two things that you might do just to make it a little less painful at times. I'm not promising I've got all the answers, but I've got a few ideas for you. So first of all, why is it so difficult? Well, one obvious thing is that generally when we're in a meeting or we're having just a conversation with somebody, we can see them. So if you're in a meeting with 3 or 4 or 10 other people and you can't see them, then it can be quite difficult. All those little non-verbal cues that we take for granted, the expression on somebody's face, the gestures that let you know that they want to say something, and so on, is all part of a normal meeting. But when all you can do is hear, then yes, you might hear a sharp intake of breath, you might hear something in somebody's tone of voice, but more often than not, you're left wondering, the people who are not speaking, what do they think? What's their response? And of course, if somebody's feeling a little bit uncomfortable and not totally confident about the audio environment, then they're less likely to say anything. So it can be an unsatisfactory medium because there will always be people who don't get as involved in an audio meeting as they would if it was face-to-face. So that's one reason why it can be a problem. The other one is that in terms of sensory preferences, the number of people whose preferred sense is their hearing are actually in the minority in the population. There are far more people who have a preference for seeing and for feeling than those who have a preference for hearing. So it means that for most people, an audio environment doesn't play to their strengths. I think one of the big challenges with this is that it requires a level of concentration to really pay attention in an audio meeting and understand what's going on and who's speaking and so on. That's a level of concentration that's much greater than is needed if you're in a face-to-face meeting where you can see everybody. So I think the level of concentration required means that people get tired faster, their attention wanders a bit faster, and also they're more easily distracted than if they were in a face-to-face type meeting. I'm sure you will have had the experience of either yourself or someone else who gets on an audio meeting, and because there isn't anything to look at, they start looking at their email or something else, usually email. I think that's the preferred thing. I hear a lot of stories about people sitting in audio meetings and catching up on email that they haven't done. So not only then are they struggling in the audio meeting, but they're also dividing their attention with something else. So those are some of the reasons why it can be quite a difficult environment to have a successful meeting in. So here's a couple of things that you might do that can make a difference. First of all, if you've got a lot of people who like to have something to look at, make sure they have got something to look at other than their email. Even if it's only 2 or 3 slides, in fact, even a single slide that focuses attention, it could just be a list of items on the agenda and a list of who's in the meeting. That could be really helpful. Just for the people who want something to look at, it gives them something to see. The other thing I'd recommend is when you're scheduling an audio meeting is don't assume that you can allow the same amount of time as you would with a face-to-face meeting. Because of the level of concentration required, most people will start to get fed up in an audio meeting after about 20 minutes, absolute maximum. For some people, 10 minutes is about as much as they can do. So you might consider, rather than having an hour in an audio conference, you might consider just breaking it up into smaller pieces. So that if you say to people, I need 10 minutes with you on the phone to do this specific task, whether that's sharing information or asking questions or whatever it is, as long as people know exactly what it is they're coming into and that it's only for a short period of time, it's usually easier to keep their attention. And far better to have 3 or 4 bursts of 10 minutes with a break in between than slog through an hour where people are not really paying attention and not getting much out of it. The other thing to think about, of course, is the technology that you're using. Now, I'm no expert on that, but I know that some of the systems I've been involved in can be very frustrating in that they cut out other speakers once one person has started to speak, and so you end up only hearing half of what somebody said. There are other systems where people can all talk simultaneously. So it's worthwhile just experimenting and finding out how your system works so that when you make your contribution to the meeting, it does actually get heard. Because there's nothing more annoying than having said something that you thought was a really good point, only to realise that nobody could actually hear you saying it. Finally, I think the most successful audio meetings need a good chairperson. You need somebody, preferably somebody who has a preference, a sensory preference for auditory thinking, somebody whose ears are quite sensitive, who will pick up nuances in somebody's tone of voice and who will be able to recognise who's speaking, perhaps also recognise who just did that sharp intake of breath. And that's something that isn't a universal skill. Some people are much better in that environment than others. So somebody on your team who has that skill will make the ideal chairperson because they won't be having to concentrate quite as hard as everybody else just to make sense of what's going on. So if you have a good chairperson who can really hear what's happening and can then make that explicit to other people, you stand a much better chance of your meeting actually working. So, in summary, what I'd say is bear in mind that this is something everybody finds difficult, or at least most people do. Bear in mind that you can't apply the same rules as you would in a face-to-face meeting. And, one of the things that you might usefully do is next time you're in an audio meeting is just ask people what's going to make it easier for them to participate. Because if you've started out by discussing the fact that this is quite a challenging medium, then you might find that it's easier to get the best out of it.